Welcome to the channel, guys. We are back again, and today I'm going to be talking about Kyara from Desir. So stay tuned for that. And if you like top 10 lists, fragrance reviews, cologne comparisons, and first impressions, hit that subscribe button for more great content. So I have experienced or I have sampled some fragrances which have oud in it. I don't mind oud as a note. I think it can be definitely very complementary to a fragrance, but I have since learned a lot about oud, and there are way different grades of it, and a lot of the fragrances that I like that have oud in them, most people would say that they have a synthetic accord which is like oud. So I wanted to try something that has real authentic oud in it, very high grade oud, and I did get a sample of Kyara from Desir. Now this has, I believe I want to say it's Vietnamese oud in it, and that is where Kyara comes from. It has to be from there. And this is a very high grade of natural oud. And to give you an idea of the price point difference for something like this, a bottle of Kyara, which is 33 milliliters, goes for around, I think, $1,200 US, which is a pretty high price tag. This sample alone was about, I think I got it lucky cent. I want to say it was $40. So very expensive, but I did really want to try out the real deal to see, what's it all about and how is it different. So getting into this fragrance, this is in some ways a rose oud fragrance. And I will say, maybe I could have selected something slightly better because I'm not a big rose oud fan to begin with. And the rose in this is actually quite strong on the opening. In fact, it's definitely, I think, the most prominent note. And it does smell a little bit like a familiar rose. So I think that people have mentioned that this does have, some kind of Japanese rose in it. I don't know that that's actually true. I don't find that anywhere on the website for Desir, and at least from what I can discern, I've definitely smelled the rose profile before. It is a high quality, fairly realistic rose accord. Now, right in the opening, the oud is pretty present. Now, it isn't really at all. So, of course, there are barnyard or skanky oud profiles, and while I do find that this one can be maybe just a slight bit harsh on the opening, I actually find that it's interesting because it is a little bit minty. I get something in this, and there is no mint or anything like that in this profile, so I'm assuming this is something to do with the oud itself. It has a bit of a minty profile, especially in the opening. Now, it does definitely come off a little bit medicinal. Kind of reminds me in some ways of rubbing alcohol to sound maybe not that great, but it does have, what a lot of people would call a medicinal vibe to it. And it does have a little bit of a characteristic of a lot of the fragrance that, for me, when I smell oud, I think of like something like the oud that's in Blackmail or Oud Wood, which in both cases is probably not authentic oud. But there are actually hints of that profile in this as well. Now, it does smell quite and completely different. Even the oud smells totally different. But there is a bit of this vibe where you have this nice woody scent that does smell different than something like, say, cedar wood or, other wood accords that you can have. And that is definitely the very prominent vibe in the opening. As it starts to tone down, the rose actually tones down a lot. So the rose really very loud and very in your face on the opening, but it does tone down a lot, and it becomes definitely a wood-dominated fragrance. I actually forgot to mention, I should mention, in the opening I get a touch of patchouli. It's very small, and it's definitely a background role, but it's there. It's definitely there. But anyways, back to as this one dries down, what I find is the rose tones down a lot. That medicinal vibe really dissipates. And in some ways I feel like that's a shame because to me, especially if I was going to pay this kind of price for a full bottle, I really want the full center of the fragrance to really be around the oud. And I really want to smell how that develops over time. And in a lot of respects, I felt like you don't really get that. So it does have oud tied in the opening, but as this one dries down, to me it becomes a lot more dominant as a cedar and sandalwood fragrance. Now the cedar is really nice. I do get a hint of that sort of fresh cut vibe with the cedar. And the sandalwood is pronounced enough that it just makes it slightly creamy. So it doesn't have that really, really smooth sandalwood vibe, but it does have a nice dry sandalwood vibe in that in the dry down. The oud again may be a little bit there, but really as this one progresses, it becomes a lot more dominated by that sandalwood and that cedar. Patchouli becomes to me non-existent. I do smell it, like I mentioned, a little bit in the opening, but I don't really get it later in the fragrance. The rose definitely dissipates within a couple of hours. It's not really there to the same extent. And there is maybe a little bit of a tinge of a woodiness that persists that is not the cedar wood or the sandalwood. But, you know, I feel like in the dry down, it's definitely more about the cedar and the sandalwood than the oud, which to me is not what I would have been looking for from something like this anyways. Now, performance in this one is actually, well, I shouldn't say really good, but it is pretty good. It's actually quite strong and has quite a bit of projection in the opening. So the first couple hours, even with just a small bit, so I checked this one a couple times. Each time I just put a few drops on my hand just so I could smell it and process it a number of times to really get an idea of what this is all about, because I really would only get a couple of wearings out of this, you know, if I didn't do it that way. But anyways, projection is quite strong. Good sillage. Definitely has, you know, a little bit of a bubble. It's not a beast mode like crazy, but it has some sillage. But as this one dies down, it definitely gets a lot closer to the skin. So this one is not crazy projector. And I'll say also, it doesn't last as long as I would have expected, especially for something like authentic oud, because, you know, it's a heavier molecule. And the other woody facets, I really was expecting this one to be like an all-day fragrance. It's definitely not. I would put it in between that 6 to 8 hour mark, which is fine because, you know, frankly, in most occasions, if I'm wearing something after 6 to 8 hours, unless I'm at work, I want the full 8 hours, right? I'm probably going to be in a position to either reapply or spray something else because I'll be changing venues, doing something different. And so it's not that bad, but again, when you think about the price point, what this costs, I really would hope for something that had projected and performed better. And so, you know, it is an interesting fragrance, and I know a lot of people might really not like what I'm about to say, but to me, this is, I don't get it. So people on Fragrantica are talking about how this is like a spiritual experience, and this is the greatest oud fragrance of all time. A lot of people are saying, and frankly, it's a little underwhelming. It's not that it's bad in any particular way, but I guess perhaps I'm not a huge oud connoisseur, and for somebody who loves oud and all the different facets, especially if it's part of your religion or your spirituality, then something like this might really work for you. But you know, as for me, it's interesting to see what oud is all about, but I couldn't foresee myself ever spending this kind of money on this type of fragrance. I probably will sample some other high-end ouds in the future, just to get a little bit more of a feel for them and to really, you know, see what's out there in that realm. But, you know, at the end of the day, for me, the price value proposition is absolutely not there. There are fragrances that for me have a lot more of the type of effect that, you know, people talk about, whether that be, you know, being very meditative. So something like Sacred Wood, which I really enjoyed, or Wulong Cha, you know, have that sort of relaxation effect, you know, or something that really gives me a sort of visceral, you know, and pleasing experience. I mean, for luxury anyways, along that lines, Musk Oud really opens up in some ways. Like the rose is similar, and I guess the sort of boozy vibe does sort of mirror some ways the medicinal nature of this, but they are totally different fragrances. But for those kinds of luxury things, for me personally, what I'm saying is that yes, there are other fragrances that I actually like significantly more, and personally, this is a nice composition. But for the price point, and for someone like me, it's just absolutely not worth it. It was nice to try. So I was considering trying maybe something from Ensar Oud. Again, just definitely going to be getting a sample. So with that, I'm going to say or ask if you've tried anything from Ensar Oud or anything else from Desir. Is there a recommendation you have, something you think really captures the spirit of oud, something high-end that is most certainly authentic oud? Leave a comment down below. And of course, if there's something that you love in the oud territory, synthetic or not, let me know. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.